Citizens of the world, friends and family, welcome back to another Keep Yours podcast. This Sunday afternoon conversation is part of the new format that we're going to move to in 2021, as well as other things, and I will tie some of those other things in very quickly. But this is Sunday afternoon about what's going on in the world this week and what's happened, and I figured it was good to wait until the Biden administration took over. Obviously, we had some chaos in the streets beforehand. But one of the things that we should all be discussing is that this is the oldest guy ever as president. Ever. And maybe he's too old. And maybe some of the people we have in Congress are too old. And I don't think that the founding fathers had any inclination that life expectancy in the 21st century would be so long, and that these people would be lifetime politicians who spend the majority of their time just trying to get reelected and doing campaign fundraising. And not just campaign fundraising, but campaign fundraising from large corporations. In 1776, there were no corporations having political contributions. There was very limited power of government. And so the people that went into government did so because they wanted to serve our nation, not because it was good for them. Now our politicians are lifetime. They go in without much in resources and they come out super wealthy, which is why we're all so damn pissed off. So Biden takes over, and it looks like Trump's going into exile, perhaps in Florida for a while, perhaps in Brazil shortly after, as they try to impeach him again. And the big topic of the month is that this was a great insurrection that Trump started and had something to, and he pushed everybody. Now, I'm not defending Trump. I have defended very few of his policies, a few of which he's had good ideas. The issues with China are good. But to call what happened in the Capitol an insurrection is very overdramatic, and I mean, it shows how crazy media has gotten these days that there is zero balanced reporting in this. Because if it was an insurrection, if he'd sent these people to really not accept the conditions of the election and to take over the state the country's capital, then they would have had a plan. And if you look at what happens in insurrections in other countries, typically, as soon as they storm that building and take over, they kill the people in charge. So no one walked up to Nancy Pelosi and put a bullet in her head. No one locked down the Capitol and said, we're taking everybody hostage. There was no plan. This was completely a clown show. And it looked more like, to me, like a sold out concert where all of a sudden, all of us who happened to be sitting outside went, hey, wait a minute. There's a back door that's open. There's only 2 guys guarding it, and there's 400 of us. Let's storm that door, and we can all get into the concert for free. And as soon as you get into the concert, what do? Well, you don't have a seat. So what are we all going to do? Run right down in front of the stage and put our feet up on the stage, which is exactly what everybody did. We're going to wander around aimlessly. No one was, you take the back doors, you take the cellar, let's go find all of these politicians. It was, hey, look, we could get in. And so why not? Now, of course, they're going to be able to find some people around the country who said we should go take that over, just like there were the crazy militants in Michigan who were willing to go kidnap the governor of Michigan. These things are real. We do have factions in the country that cause major problems. You know, crazy people like Timothy McVeigh blow up federal buildings. However, there's a flip side to this. And this is that our people we're so divided right now. And it's because government doesn't work for us at all anymore. Congress is a joke. The Supreme Court's supposed to stand up to both layers of government, and they don't do anything that they're supposed to do. Nothing. So, of course, we're going to have these kinds of problems. But should Trump be impeached for this? Does the country need to deal with another impeachment trial because we're worried about him running again in 4 years? He's old too. Maybe what we should just do is create term limits and we can get rid of both of these old guys in 4 years and get in some new blood. Maybe. So what's the super old white guy, we might as well say, in the White House going to do? Well, immediately we want to send $1,600 more to everybody. Why are we sending money to people who don't need it? For those who are out of jobs, I agree we should help them with unemployment if they didn't lose their job of any of their problem. But by giving everybody money, we're creating more and more problems. The stock market has got speculation going on a level that I don't think we've ever seen. It makes it feel like the 2008 financial crisis, married the dot-com bubble, married 1929, married Black Friday in 1987. There is speculation everywhere. Janet Yellen's now heading up the Treasury, clearly showing we have no separation of the Federal Reserve and the Treasury as it's supposed to be. But we can't audit the Federal Reserve, so it's not ours. It actually belongs to all the big banks. So who's working for who? It seems as though a lot of us have reasons to really be upset. The federal government spending whose money? Because last I checked, we're supposed to send checks to the federal government for them to run our country. Now they're sending us checks, and they're going to continue to. Maybe this is bad policy. Maybe we shouldn't be sending checks to every American because not every American is feeling the same pain. Maybe we should figure out how to get the money to the people who need it. But this goes back to the fundamental problem in government. We're relying on our federal government to do things locally, and this makes no sense. So we're going to allow the federal government to tax us all individually. So I live in Colorado, so my money from Colorado goes to Washington, D.C. Then in Washington, D.C., those people who may or may not ever set foot in Colorado, who may or may not ever understand the problems that are actually going on locally in Colorado, are then going to devise the ways to fix them. Or devise how much money they're going to give to each state to fix it. And this is supposed to work well. And the government keeps creating these great problems that they're going to solve. They keep taking the money. They never seem to really solve the problem. So we were told that there's a war on poverty. But since they started that war on poverty, we have more poor people. So just like Iraq and Afghanistan, where we've lost those wars, just like Vietnam, where we've lost that war, just like Korea, where we've essentially lost that war. We haven't won a war in America in a very, very long time. And we keep creating our own new wars. Wars against our own people. So we have wars on poverty. We have a war on drugs. Well, the drug users are Americans. And if we want to look at who created the most drug users in America, well, the federal government funded it and allowed it to be run through the FDA, through pharmaceutical companies, who really don't care at all about Americans, but take all the Americans' money while they get them addicted to what is essentially legal heroin in the form of opiates, in the form of OxyContin. Purdue Pharma, a bigger drug dealer than the whole country of Colombia, got more people addicted to heroin than all the other drug dealers combined. El Chapo's in prison. We've killed drug dealers in multiple countries. The heads of Purdue Pharma, billionaires. It stinks. It stinks. And we need to do some things about it. And then, here's my anecdotal for work. Andrew Yang came out and when he ran for president on this idea of universal basic income. And he said, the robots are going to take over. And when the robots take over, we need to provide people with income every month because they don't have jobs. But instead, what's happening is the government's giving everybody money now, which means that people don't want to go to work. 80% of people who got the extra unemployment benefits that they handed out last year, made more money on unemployment than they did working. Now, if that's not creating a moral hazard created by government, then I don't know what is. Because that's obviously a moral hazard. You make more money not working than working. Sort of sends the wrong message on what we need in America. We can't all keep buying things if no one's making anything. Collectively, America's worth, value, GDP, however you want to measure it, whatever criteria you want to come up with, it's all based on the things we make. And if we're not making things, and right now we're just taking our US dollars and sending them over to foreign countries and buying the things from them. We have the largest trade deficits ever because Americans aren't working. Employers want to run second shifts, want to hire people, having a hard time finding candidates. Why? Because the government's paying them more not to work than to get a job. This is a problem. And it's going to create automation because if you can't find people to do the jobs, then you automate them, not because it's necessarily cheaper to do so, but because you don't have a choice. So we're going to end up with the workers requiring the free money from the government because the government handed them out free money to begin with, not because the robots took all of their jobs. Robots have been taking jobs for the last 100 years. You don't hear about anybody complaining that no one's in your house to wash your dishes or clean your clothes anymore because you have a dishwasher and laundry machine. I don't hear any bank tellers screaming and crying because all of the digital transactions that happen now and because people use ATMs. In fact, oftentimes when I go in my bank, usually for commercial purposes, there's nobody in there. People don't go to banks hardly at all anymore, but they're still bank workers. So the robots are always coming. Somebody probably used to have to drag ice. Now we have ice machines. We used to create ice underground and then drag it around to businesses. Now you got an ice machine that plugs in. We have electricity to your house. No one complains that people used to do those jobs. There will be more jobs. They're just different, and it takes time. Should we help people in the meantime? Yes. Should we be giving everybody more money to not work than to work? Absolutely not. This is crazy. All right, so that in and of itself was plenty to cover for one day and plenty of things to think about. But what's next? What next for me means we need to talk not just about today, but about tomorrow. And it's difficult to change the discussion to our future from the today when we have so much chaos going on. I mean, out this week in the New York Times, deaths of despair from the lockdowns. Now, I talked about this early on. Now, if we were losing a large number of people, as in like the Spanish flu killed 100 million people, and I think it killed 40 million Americans. We're at a couple 100,000 so far, and people are claiming that these numbers, one life's too many. Well, that's not true because they're not giving us real numbers to context anything. They're not telling us about how many people die every year from all different causes of mortality, things we don't shut down the whole economy for, things we don't shut down schools now. So in this week's New York Times article, suicide rates for teens are way up, so they're trying to restart schools so teens stop committing suicide because they don't have anywhere to go, anyone to talk to. We all know domestic violence is up, alcoholism is up, drug overdoses are up. These are a result of government lockdowns that in my mind are completely unnecessary. If you're at high risk, it's your responsibility to protect yourself, not the government's to protect everyone from everything all the time. They can't. And obviously these lockdowns aren't working. So in California, they've shut down all the businesses. They've shut down all the restaurants. They've shut down all the gyms. Meanwhile, the virus is spreading like crazy anyway. So obviously your lockdowns have not achieved your goal, but we're going to continue it anyway. And that's not to say that I'm not sympathetic to the people that are dying, but people die every year from many things. And when we get all-cause mortality, all deaths from all reasons across the entire country, we are going to find that 2020 and 2021 will not be exceptionally high years of death. Because no one's dying from the flu. It's basically non-existent because everyone's wearing a mask and not allowed to go anywhere. So the flu deaths are way down. Typically, 40 to 60,000 people a year die from the flu. So are those lives saved? And can we save every life? We can't keep having these lockdowns. They are detrimental. And the damage we're doing is going to be far greater than the deaths that are occurring. And while it sounds unsympathetic to say it, it's a truth that needs to be told. There are no such thing as saved lives. We can extend where somebody would have died and where they die later. We do that all the time with Western medicine. You break your femur bone and you're bleeding. You go to get acute medicine. That thing might have killed you 200 years ago. Now you get saved. Well, you still die. Everyone who had their leg fixed in the 1950s and 60s and 70s is dying. Every soldier that got dragged off the battlefield that might have bled out, whose life was saved in World War II, is now dead. We don't save lives, we get to extend some. But we're doing damage to others, and we have to figure out this balance. We at least have to have the conversation. Getting deplatformed because you don't believe in lockdowns is not a strategy. That's like communism. Where's free speech in America? Where's we debate it? Where's we have controls and our government is for us and by us? Where's that in these decision makings when you're shutting down small businesses that have done nothing wrong? Destroying people's lives economically, taking jobs away from millions of Americans. I'm not even going to get into another 900,000 people because filed for unemployment last week and the week before that and the week before that, because this is now just common. But we don't want to pretend that it's real. There are consequences to these political actions. In addition to which I'll get into next. But how long are we going to go with these massive drug overdoses? When are we going to discuss all-cause mortality so we have context for the number of people dying? When they say 5,000 people died from COVID today, and that's the maximum ever, what's missing from that data is that 8,000 people die every day. So did 5,000 people more die than normally the 8,000 people that die every day? Did we have 13,000 deaths across the country yesterday? Or did the people who were dying from heart attacks and pneumonia and strokes now get COVID and are dying from COVID instead? I don't have the answers to all these questions, but I know none of it's being discussed in the media. And now we'll discuss the power of social media. The President of the United States can have his account shut down. Now, I'm not in disagreement that if you are inciting violence, then your account should be shut down and content inciting violence should be taken down. But who gets to make that decision? What is the criteria for inciting violence? What can you say and can you not say? So we're going to leave QAnon stuff up, but we're going to take stuff from the president down. We're going to... Who gets to decide? Or do we collectively get to decide that? Because right now, when it's private companies deciding it, again, a moral hazard. When they decide we're inciting violence? Because some protesters turn violent, all protests have to be stopped? I don't know. I don't have the answers to these questions either, but I know that the power of social media companies is far too great. And if there's going to be rules, if they're going to take down some content, then are they responsible for all content? Or, because they've been operating under these rules that they're not responsible. But if they're going to say that they're going to limit free speech. Now, free speech is free, but you can't walk into a movie theater and say there's a fire. For that, you can get arrested. So, what are the rules? And are those going to be even across the board? Or do social media companies become political institutions where all of a sudden the politics is more important? Who said it means we're not going to put it up there versus what was said. Is Joe Biden allowed to say the same things Donald Trump was and he gets an audience, but Donald Trump doesn't? These are problems. This is creating a moral hazard. And it's been identified from leaders around the world who lead free countries, like Angela Merkel in Germany, said, this is not a good precedent. These are problems, and we need to listen to that. We need to have these conversations because they're hard. The other big thing this week, frenzies in the markets. Oh my goodness. If you don't know what a SPAC is, because everyone needs a SPAC, because there's a ton of money being made. A few years ago, it was coins. Create a new company with coins. Now there's all sorts of people going to go to jail for fraud. Now it's special purpose acquisition companies. And what they do is it's basically a blank check company where hedge funds and pension funds give people who they think can figure out a good deal a bunch of money with zero plan in mind, except for to go make money finding a company to buy and take public and take 20% of all the profits. And who gets left with all of these stocks? Your 401k plan, your pension plan for your state. They don't talk about it, but that's who's getting it. Guess what? You got a pension plan, you own part of your pension plan, probably owns Tesla, up 700% last year. Why? No good reason, just because it's a frenzy right now. Back to like 1998 frenzy, But here's the thing. Government's sending everybody checks, people who don't need it. And that's creating more gambling in the marketplace. They also lower interest rates, which creates more gambling in the marketplace. And they're not stopping any of this. So we've got the greatest amount of leveraged bets ever in history. And we got TikTok videos about, how to turn your $600 stimmy into 13 grand real quick. Just buy stocks like I do because they always go up. So you just buy stocks and then sell them later when they've gone up. That's how you make money. Huh? What happened to companies actually showing profits before they were valuable? Profits seem to be not in vogue. Just an idea that you can get some customers at some point along the way. Maybe you'll make some money eventually. Seems to be working for everybody. Debt seems to be the thing. But when's all this debt going to get paid back? With what earnings? Tesla goes up 700%, but if it's that valuable, then how come if it's that valuable and it's going to take over the whole market, then how come the other car company stock of Ford and GM are not plummeting? Because they're going to lose all that market share. How are they all going up? Doesn't make any sense. So logic is out of the market, but logic goes away when all of a sudden the government's just sending you a stimulus check that you don't need. Hey, I'll save it. Here's another thought you might not have thought about. While consumer debt is back to an all-time high, people are paying off their credit cards to some degree with their stimulus checks. Now, if those same people end up declaring bankruptcy down the road, that stimulus check is effectively a handout to a big bank because they use that to pay down the credit card that would have got discharged in bankruptcy. Instead, the big banks collect that money. And the big banks, well, we all know that they cheat and cheat and cheat. And they also own the Federal Reserve, so they get to cheat. Now, here's one of the things that came out this last couple weeks as the Trump insurrection news hit a fever pitch. Across the news was that political contributions by the biggest banks, by the JP Morgans and Bank of America, they were pausing their contributions to Republican super PACs. Now, what I didn't see in the media was, why are we not questioning why these companies are donating so much money to political parties? Why aren't we questioning Citizens United? Why aren't we as the citizens taking up? So Trump's going to say that the election was stolen from him. I'm going to tell you the election's been stolen from all of us. Because it's not citizens who are directing advertising. It's not citizens who are contributing to to funds for people to get elected. It's massive companies, the biggest banks, donating millions to both sides. So you want to know why there's a swamp? Why Washington can't get anything done? Because they're all out trying to get all these corporate political campaign contributions. And don't give me that it's one side or the other. They all do it. That's why none of them get anything done. Because after any of them get elected, the line of people out the door, it costs billions to get elected these days. The line of people out the door to collect on their contributions to help you get elected is long. And so you can't do what's right for the American people. Instead, You have to do what the people who got you elected want you to do, which is why we have a tax code that's full of loopholes. I mean, they wrote the loopholes. We call them a loophole, but it's not a loophole. It's an intentionally written way to not pay taxes. Intentionally written by politicians. Well, why? Because they're beholden to all the people who got them elected. We should be asking, if this is how we want our country to run, maybe part of the reason all of the citizens are so upset is because they realize that the companies aren't working for them. And what does the government do? It allows these massive companies to get bigger and bigger and bigger. We're not promoting small businesses. Yes, we did offer more PPP money this week to small businesses that are shut down. Some more money to restaurants. But you have to use all that money for payroll, or most of it, which is hard for businesses that don't have the doors open. And it's hard to hire back your whole staff and have the same demand week after week after week when you're not allowed to have the same amount of customers in your establishment. But yet the landlords want the rent and the cities want the taxes. There's going to be a reckoning. But maybe one of the reasons that our country's in such dire straits politically is because of who we're allowing to put money into the political system and how much money the government controls. So our country is divided. Where do we go from here? That's this week's news shows it more and more. You can't deny the fact that 70 million people voted for Trump. The fact that 71 million voted for Biden, and we had one of the best turnouts in total population of people participating ever, is good. But what's the job of our government? What's the role that our government's supposed to play? Is your government supposed to make sure you've got a job, that you get educated, that you have retirement, that you have health care? Are they supposed to hold our hand all the way through life? Or is that our responsibility? And pieces of government that should be done locally are done locally. Anything, the Constitution says anything that can be done by the states should be given to the states. Has our government grown too big? Have we given it too much power? Has it not been fair in its exercise of that power? Has it passed laws that are unconstitutional that the Supreme Court has not overturned, such as Citizens United, such as the Patriot Act, which allowed the government to spy on us? And also, in this week's news, was that our government's been spying on us using GPS as well. In addition to listening to our conversations illegally and recording our text messages illegally, and probably accessing everything on all of our phones illegally. And they called that the Patriot Act. Maybe our government's been given too much power. So what are we going to do about it? The other question is, if we believe the government's supposed to do all of these things for us, maybe we ought to look at what they've been in charge of already and whether or not they've been able to handle that. So let's talk about education. So we have an education department federally, which I don't know why that exists, because last I checked, all education was done locally. No one goes to federal high school. We go to county high schools. So why are we paying taxes to go to Washington to fund a federal idea of education instead of letting that be done locally? And since the federal government's involved, how are they doing with that? Let's talk about how they've done with the FDA and nutrition requirements, because this also came out in the last couple weeks. The FDA created a panel of scientists to potentially adjust the recommendations in the dietary guidelines. The scientists came back and they said, we highly recommend, which in science speak is more like saying, you should do this. And they said, you should do less sugar and less alcohol. What did the FDA do? Now, let's back that thought up one second. How are we doing in America with healthcare? You could probably correlate our how are we doing with healthcare with how are we doing with COVID. Not good. Not good with either. We got COVID problems, we got healthcare problems. Most of the people dying have comorbidities. Now, they want to hide this from us so that we don't look down upon people with these comorbidities, but we have to have a discussion in America about obesity. It's an epidemic. We're fat as a country. Fat. And that's a problem. It's not okay. We need to shame our whole entire country. We do. So the FDA is in charge of dietary guidelines. Since they've issued dietary guidelines in the 1970s, America has gotten more and more fat. Scientific panel recommends that the FDA change the guidelines. All evidence in front of us shows that those guidelines need to be changed. What do? Absolutely nothing. They didn't change any guideline. Why, we ask? Because the sugar lobby. It's easy. The sugar lobby does not want them to change it. The alcohol lobby does not want them to change it. Because if they change those guidelines, it changes what's in schools. If I was in charge, we would have zero sugar. Zero sugar in the guidelines, which means what? That every single soda machine in all of those schools has to be removed. And that's what should happen. Instead, we let our children get poisoned. Sugar is highly inflammatory and causes cancer. Straight up, no doubt about it. Are we educating people on this? No. I have a theory on COVID. I have a theory that says that people can't produce ketones are the ones getting more and more sick. Now, most Americans don't even know what ketones are or why they're important. But ketones are actually what allows your body to use fat for energy. And it's actually the most efficient way your body would like and prefer to use energy. But instead, we're all on high carbohydrate diets. Oh, carbohydrates. Oh yeah, that's that sugar thing we were just talking about, right? Oh, yeah. And also all the processed flours that immediately turn to sugar as soon as you put them in your body. So if we had no sugar, then our bodies would all be producing ketones. Then when we got sick, even though we weren't eating, we would still have energy because we would burn fat. Instead, if you can't get into ketosis, then you can't burn fat for energy. And if you're sick and throwing up, then guess what? You've got no energy to fight off this virus. Part of your immune system may be linked to your ability to produce ketones. But we don't want to talk about that because we don't want to shame anybody into the fact that they might not be healthy, despite all evidence to the contrary, despite the fact that you cannot find me one doctor in the United States that any other doctor would support who legitimately says being fat is healthy. It's not. There's no way fat and pressure around your organs is healthy. It's just not. And no one's going to convince anyone otherwise because it's crazy. That's not rational. Having a few extra pounds during the winter for meals that you might miss, okay, but we don't miss those meals anymore. And turns out missing those meals kind of important to your immunity. But we don't talk about that. FDA guidelines don't include intermittent fasting or fasting period, ever. In fact, it's 3 meals a day, with breakfast being the most important. Meanwhile, I watched a TED Talk that says intermittent fasting is providing fascinating and great results for people. So maybe when you eat is as important as what you eat, but the FDA is not going to tell us that. All right, so that's just one on the general health of the country. Okay, how have they done on education? Well, I'd say horribly once again. Because the education that you get depends on your socioeconomic status to start with. So if the government's going to be involved, shouldn't they have tried to make that a little more equal? Maybe. How's the government doing with retirement plans? Well, at the state level, they're all significantly underfunded, or mostly unfunded, to the extent that they're basically insolvent. How's Social Security? Medicare? Insolvent. How's giving the government control over the money supply gone for us? 25 trillion on the balance sheet in debt, another 100 trillion off the balance sheet in debt. Seems like our government hasn't done very well with any of the tasks that they've been given to do. But we're going to give them more. A lot of this country wants government to solve all the problems. I got a problem with that. Our government's not good at solving problems. So why do we want to give them more to solve? I don't. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is, why did our founding fathers set up America with the system they did? Why did Benjamin Franklin say, "We give you a republic if you can keep it"? Because they studied history. They knew how hard this was to do. And why did the framers put in all of these limitations? Because they viewed previous governments. They searched history and saw all the pitfalls that had befallen other empires and other countries. The history of the United States is what we need to study. All the good and bad parts. Right? Because the United States was the first, well, not the first beacon of democracy, because within Rome there were republics and within Greece, but at the same time you also had a lot of slavery. Right? So we can't focus on the freedoms and prosperity of America without looking at the genocide and crimes against humanity that have also been perpetuated here. Because let's be honest, Christopher Columbus did not discover America. There were tens, if not hundreds of millions of people already living here. The Incas were living in Central America. The American Indians were living in America. And I don't even want to call them Indians because they're not from India. They're Americans. The first Americans were already here. Some of them still exist to this day. Most of them got killed through genocides of disease. And if you'd like to study the history of that, read Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's what you need to know about why and how we were able to conquer. So we need to look at all the other systems that have been tried throughout history. We need to go back and study that the founding fathers looked at all of these things in great detail. Right? We got to look at the failings of the other systems. Why the founding fathers set our system up the way they did, and how we haven't held our government to account for all of the things they've done since then. And then we can get to what's the role going forward? Because we need to ask that question. And I have another series that's going to come out that is the history of finance in America. But we have to start with history. So that's this week's Sunday conversation about the things that are in the news that struck me this week and bothered me a little bit. I hope that helps you in educating yourself on some of the things you want to follow up on, some of the questions you want to ask, and how are we going to change this country? Because here's what's coming. I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. The fourth turning. We're very, very close. We're in this turning phase where all of a sudden we're going to have an opportunity to remake this country. Because the promises that have been made to the baby boomers cannot be held up by the millennials, and nor should they. They're promises that are beyond the ability of the country to do. We can't promise everyone checks every month into perpetuity without consequence. We can't promise pensions to everybody in perpetuity while life expectancy continues to expand without consequence. Who's going to pay for all of these things? Who's going to do all of the work? And I'm pretty sure the millennials are going to reject the idea that they do all the work for the baby boomers. The question is, where do we go from here? Thanks for listening to this Sunday conversation. Wish we had more better news for you this week. And I'm going to start trying to find the things that we can be grateful for in our country. The things that we can be happy about on a weekly basis. Because while our capitalism and free markets are definitely under siege, and the question of what we're going to do going forward looms large in my mind, there are things that we can be grateful for every week, and we should be. And when we find gratitude in our daily and weekly lives, then it makes everything else seem so much better. Because We are blessed to be in America, where I have the ability to exercise free speech, where I'm not arrested. If I look around the world at what's going on right now, it disturbs me greatly. Hong Kong, agreed to by China to be a democracy for 50 years. Its democracy is over. Anyone who stands for democracy has been arrested, taken to China, beaten and tortured until they admit to it. Not only is that going on in China right now, but they're enslaving populations. The Uyghurs are being taken into camps for re-education and then being put to work in factories. De facto, it's slavery by any other name. Now, the Trump administration actually did come out and say that this week before they left office in an interesting kind of over-the-bow shot to sort of throw the alarm up about China, about other reasons that maybe we should be uniting with other countries around the world to contain China's power. Because the way the Chinese exercise their power is very frightening. And we think that none of that can happen here, but we're wrong. Our republic is new. It is young. It is our job to hold our government accountable, and we have done a terrible job of that. Our branches of government have not done their role. And we are going to have to fundamentally ask the question as a nation, what are we going to do next? What are we going to have as America? Thanks for listening. Please pass on to your family and friends, and we'll catch you next time.